An original podcast from podlatino.com.
There's something almost all of us have experienced at least once. Someone comes up to us, looks at us with real attention, and says exactly what we needed to hear. They tell us we're good at something, that we have a special talent, that others don't see it, but they do. And in that moment, something in us relaxes. Our guard comes down, we nod along, and before we know it, we're doing exactly what that person wanted. You don't have to be naive to fall for it. You just have to be human. The desire to be recognized is as old as language itself. And that's what this story is about. A crow was flying over the fields when he came across something unusual. A good piece of cheese, firm and fragrant, left behind near a farmhouse. He didn't hesitate long. He scooped it up in his beak and looked for a quiet spot to enjoy it without anyone fighting him for it. He chose a high branch where he could see everything and wasn't easy to reach. There he sat, with his prize, ready for the moment he deserved. But someone had been watching. A fox was making her way through the area and had spotted the cheese from the start. She knew the crow. She knew he was bigger, that he was up high, that fighting wasn't going to work. But she also knew something else, that crows, like so many other animals and like so many people, have a weakness that's hard to hide. The fox moved in slowly. She sat at the base of the tree, and she looked up. What she did next wasn't threaten or demand. It was the opposite. She began to speak in a voice full of admiration. She said she had never seen such a striking crow, that his black feathers had an elegance few birds could match. That surely a creature so distinguished, so perfectly formed, must also have an extraordinary voice. One of those voices you hear once and never forget. The crow listened, and something in his posture began to shift. At first he was still, almost indifferent, but the fox's words were doing their work. Not because the crow was foolish, but because hearing that you're special carries a particular kind of weight, especially when no one else has said it lately, or when it's been a long time since anyone did. The fox kept going. What a shame it would be not to hear him sing. She was sure his voice would rival the finest birds in the forest. And the crow, wanting to prove he was everything she said and more, opened his beak. The cheese fell. The fox caught it before it hit the ground. And as she chewed it calmly, she told the crow that yes, his voice was remarkable, but perhaps he still had a few things to learn about the world. Then she walked off without any hurry, well fed. This story appears in some of the oldest collections we know of. It's traditionally attributed to Aesop, the Greek fabulist whose very existence is something of a mystery. No direct records of his work survive, and what we know came through versions compiled centuries later by other writers. The fable of the crow and the cheese is among those compilations, though we can't say with certainty whether Aesop invented it or whether he simply sat down in writing a story that had been circulating by word of mouth for much longer. What we do know is that it survived. It passed into Latin through the Roman writer Phaedrus, and centuries later it reached the hands of Jean de La Fontaine, the French poet who in the 17th century turned it into one of his best-known verses. La Fontaine's version has music, it has rhythm, and it gives the crow a name, a character, a kind of dignity that makes his downfall all the more vivid. From there, the fable worked its way into school books across half of Europe and never really left. There's something worth looking at carefully in this story. The fox doesn't trick the crow by lying to him about the world. She tricks him by lying to him about himself. That's the difference. A lie about the facts can be checked, But a lie about our own worth goes somewhere we don't always have the right tools to measure. Are we really as good as this person says? Do we have the talent they seem to admire so much? It's not easy to know, especially when part of us wants it to be true. Flattery as a tool hasn't gone anywhere. It shows up in everyday conversations, in negotiations, in relationships of all kinds. Some people learn early on that telling someone what they want to hear is one of the most effective ways to get what you're after. Not always with bad intentions, not always with full awareness, but with a real effect. Flattery softens resistance. It opens doors that rational argument sometimes can't. And the fox didn't invent that. Any creature capable of watching another carefully figured it out long before her. The crow in this fable doesn't fall because he lacks intelligence. He falls because he has something the fox identified with precision: a desire to be seen, a completely understandable desire. All of us, to some degree, want someone to notice what we do, what we are, what we have to offer. The problem isn't wanting that. The problem is when that desire becomes an open door that anyone can walk through with the right words. What's interesting to think about is what might have happened if the crow had been able to pause for just a moment. Not to distrust everyone, not to reject the compliment, but to ask himself one simple question. Why is this person telling me this right now? What do they want? Not every compliment comes loaded with hidden intent. Of course it doesn't. There's genuine admiration in the world. There are people who point out our strengths without wanting anything in return. But there's a different texture between recognition that comes with no strings attached and recognition that arrives just when someone needs something from us. Learning to tell those two things apart doesn't make anyone suspicious or cold. It makes them someone who can receive a compliment with genuine gratitude without letting the cheese drop. There's another reading of this story, less obvious, but just as valid. The fox gets what she wants, yes, but she does it through deception. And even though the fable doesn't show any consequences for her, in real-life strategies built on manipulation tend to have a shelf life. People remember when they were played, and that memory carries weight. The crow, for his part, walks away from the story without the cheese, but with something that might be worth more: a clearer sense of where he's vulnerable. That, if you're willing to learn it, is much harder to take away. Fables last for centuries not because they tell us things we don't already know, but because they remind us of things we knew and sometimes forget. The crow and the fox have been meeting on that branch for thousands of years, and they'll keep meeting there. Because vanity hasn't gone anywhere, and neither has cunning. What we can do is recognize, when we're the ones perched on that branch, something valuable held tight, while someone below looks up at us with a smile that's just a little too warm.